Hey, I'm Tyler with Bike Rumor, and this is my first impressions review of the Trust Performance Message Trailing Link Suspension Fork. So this thing was probably one of the best kept secrets in the cycling industry. Despite being backed by some of the best carbon fiber experts, suspension experts, and an all-star management team, some people all really well respected in the industry, this thing debuted after years of development and almost nobody saw this coming. It also launched with some really bold claims in terms of performance. Originally they said, oh, it can replace anything from a 110 to like a 150 or 160 fork, 27.5, 29, 27.5 plus, whatever wheels you want to throw in there, put it on almost any kind of bike, didn't matter. Well, they had to scale that back just a little bit, and here's where we ended up. The Message is 130 millimeter light trail fork for bikes around 120 mil rear travel that were designed with a 130 to 140 fork up front. They say it's also good for 29ers or 27.5, though you might find you end up with a little bit taller than the desired fork if you're running standard 27.5 wheels and tires. 27.5 plus will get you closer to normal, and in fact, many 29er mountain bike forks are also considered 27.5 plus compatible. The secret sauce of Trust's Message fork is this, the trailing linkage design. Like your rear suspension, the linkage here is designed to give them more control over the suspension curve, meaning they can make it really supple at the start, then firm up higher into the travel. Yes, this is how most air springs work anyway, but adding levers to control that ratio gives them more control over that. Kind of like what bike brands are doing on the back of a full suspension bike. But there's more to the story than just leverage ratio. It's also about steering response, or more specifically, caster angle. So what's caster? For that, let's head into the lab. Caster is the angle between your steering axis, this blue line, and a vertical line drawn through the center of the axle, the red line here. So caster is typically measured up here, this angle, C for caster. The number we're more familiar with as cyclists is the head angle. So this number here, HA for head angle. The other number that we're concerned with as cyclists, and the one that Trust is really concerned with maintaining, is trail. And so the trail is basically the point on the ground where your steering axis hits and where the center of the thing is, and the distance between that is your trail. The longer the trail, the more stable the bike. And here's why that works. So imagine this is your tire looking top down, and here is the point where your steering axis hits the ground. Okay, now imagine your tire is turning, and turning like this. Here's the point where your tire is being led by. So what's going to happen as this is going forward? Becomes the pivot point in theory, and the back end wants to fall in line. So think about like a shopping cart wheel. The reason why they trail behind is because they're trying to follow that forward pivot, and they'll fall into line. No matter which way you turn, they fall into line behind it. The concept is the same here. And so if you just let off the handlebar and this is going forward, the wheel is going to straighten up and follow this point. So the longer you have this point, the more stable that's going to be behind it. That's why bikes of all distant travel lengths, like from cross country to enduro, they all seem to be getting slacker head angles these days because everybody wants a more stable bike at high speed. So the trick with a telescoping fork is, as the fork compresses, because the wheel is traveling in that same angle, that effectively your head angle is getting steeper, and the trail, as you can see now at that new point, if we draw lines down from there, the trail is now a lot shorter. And so a shorter trail is going to be a little bit twitchier bike, which is not necessarily the thing that Trust is most concerned with. What they're concerned with is the fact that your steering response and the steering feel changes as the fork compresses when you have a telescoping fork. So what they did is they gave it a rearward axle path, and what that does is, even though the fork is still compressing and your head angle is changing, this longer trail simply shifts back as the fork compresses. And so you end up with, theoretically anyway, a trail that stays way more consistent throughout the fork's travel, and therefore a steering feel and response that should stay more consistent throughout the travel. That's the concept. Okay, now back to the trail. Typically as we ride, our bodies just automatically adjust to that changing trail figure because, well, that's kind of what we're used to. Decades and decades of riding have conditioned our bodies to just adapt to what we've been riding. But Trust thought it would be better if they could keep a consistent trail figure and thereby a more consistent or steering response as the fork went through its travel. That's the theory, but what we all want to know is, how does that translate onto the trail? Well, not so fast. There's still more to the story. Because the axle path is both upward and rearward, they say that helps the tire maintain better traction on the ground over rough terrain. It also has an anti-dive effect, which means when you brake hard, the fork won't dive, so it leaves more of the travel available for soaking up bumps, which all combined has an interesting double effect. Stand over the bike and press down, and the fork feels mostly firm. But when you run into something, it's really supple, which means it feels like it has some sort of platform and isn't going to bob around when you're sprinting, but without the usual downsides of a platform, such as decreased small bump sensitivity. Which all adds up to something that, on paper, should be God's gift to mountain bikers, right? Well, yes and no. First, let's look at the numbers. I mounted the Message to my Niner Jet 9 RDO, swapping out the stock 130mm Fox 34. The Fox has an axle to crown measurement of 537mm, and I measured a wheelbase of 119 centimeters. With the wheels marked in place, I measured the height from the rear of the lower headset cup to the ground at 83.2 centimeters. The Message has an axle to crown measurement of 535mm, and even though it makes the front end look really stretched out there, I measured a wheelbase of, wait for it, 119 centimeters, exactly the same as with the Fox. And the measurement to the lower headset cup? That came in at 83 centimeters, just 2 millimeters shorter than with the Fox. In other words, the starting position for both forks is virtually identical. Fully compressed, they end up in virtually the same exact position too. Here they are shown on a block of wood that measured about 135 millimeters tall, which would technically eat up all of the travel of the fork plus a little bit. And here they are with the front wheels on the ground, but with the fork still fully compressed. So you'd think they'd handle about the same, right? Wrong. Initially, I thought for sure this fork was pushing my front wheel out further because it just looks like it does. And out on the trails in DuPont National Forest over near Asheville, it seemed like it took a lot more effort to keep my weight over the front wheel and really drive hard into a corner. I had a lot harder time maintaining traction when I was really trying to, just rip through a turn. So when I saw the numbers, I was really surprised. So much so that I actually reinstalled the Fox 34 and double-checked my wheelbase measurement. The other thing that felt odd was where my weight ended up on the bike over bigger bumps. Riding this rocky section in DuPont National Forest, which is almost like a gnarly staircase of drops and rock obstacles, there are a few hits where it looks like my body is shifting forward. And on one bigger hit on another section of trail, which was at a little bit lower speed, I did feel like I was lurching forward. Granted, these are more aggressive trails where all of my friends were riding 150 to 160 bikes, so compared to my 120 to 130 Jet, I did feel a little bit outgunned, but it still seemed like this feeling was more pronounced than what I would have liked or what I'm used to. Which makes sense, because if the wheel is moving rearward in the travel, it's effectively shortening the wheelbase and also putting that rear wheel under you more, which would make it feel like your weight's becoming more forward on the bike. Which feels weird when you're hitting big gnarly trails deep out in the woods with big rocks. Back on my home trails here in Country Park in Greensboro, North Carolina, it's a lot more XC oriented, and so that OTB feeling was a lot less pronounced. And I mean, it kind of just disappeared, but it still seemed like I was having a harder time maintaining good traction on the front end. I do realize that seems counterintuitive, because if the wheel's coming under you, your weight's more over it, then why would it feel like you need to get more weight on the front tire? Well, here's a theory on this. If the trail is staying longer, then the steering would feel just a little bit slower because, longer trail is going to have a more stable, slower steering feel. So, right or wrong, that's kind of what I'm going with. Either way, it feels a little weird after decades of conditioning my body to riding telescoping forks. For a proper back-to-back comparison, I did a lap here at Country Park, then switched back to the 34. Same bike, same trail, same ride. And the 34 just felt a little more poppy and playful. It's also a lot lighter and a lot more affordable. It's not all weird and bad though. So the Trust Message is a really stiff fork, and that's aided by the fact that it runs RockShox torque caps as stock, and then you can also put in normal 15 by 110 boost front through axles as well. So the other cool thing is you set up air pressure on both sides. There's actually air springs on both sides of the fork, and they say just put the PSI as your body weight. So for me, that technically would have been about 187 PSI on both sides. They also said you could run a little bit lower. I actually set it up with 170, and that felt really, really good. It was a little more supple, but I still haven't bottomed out. Even on the big gnarly trails out in DuPont, I only got through about 85, maybe 90% of my travel. And the little sag indicator on the other side not only helps you set sag, but it also shows you how much travel you used on any given ride. The fact that I still didn't use all my travel means I could set it up just a little bit softer, which I really like. So where does that leave us? Well, honestly, I'm not quite sure. The Trust Message is a very interesting technology story, and in some respects it works really, really well. But for me, it also affected my handling in a way that I didn't like. The conclusion I keep circling back to is, it's not bad, I just don't know who it's for. Considering the price of admission, I'd say it's definitely worth trying before you buy it if you can. Fortunately, they do offer a 30-day guarantee, so you can get it, try it on your home trails, on your own bike, and if you don't love it, send it back and they'll give you a full refund, which is definitely a nice touch. So I'd say if you haven't been able to get a fork to handle the way you want, whether it's in the steering or the telescoping action or just the smoothness, maybe it's worth giving the Message a try. Thanks a ton for watching. If you like this review and you want more reviews and more tech videos on all the latest and greatest cycling components, be sure to check out our channel on youtube.com/bikegroomer. Hit like, hit subscribe, and make sure you don't miss a single video.